For the first two acts of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, the Paintress is presented as the primary villain of the story. She is portrayed as a distant figure of immense power shrouded in mystery. No one knows what she is, where she came from, why, or even how she is doing what she is doing. 67 years ago, the world these characters inhabit was shattered in a catastrophic event known as the Fracture. The world itself was literally torn to pieces. Massive chunks of the earth were pulled apart and thrown into the sky, and the land was invaded by a flood of violent, twisted creatures known as Nevrons, which immediately began slaughtering any living creature within reach. The only humans who survived were those lucky enough to end up on this island, a small broken fragment of what had once been a vast city, which now lay cast into the sea. Among this death and chaos and calamity, the Paintress emerged, as if from nowhere, a colossal humanoid creature, along with a stone monolith of incredible scale, so large that it towers over the entire world. In that first year after the fracture, she painted a number on the face of the monolith, the number 100. With this task complete, she settled into what looked like a long sleep, remaining dormant for another 12 months. What people would soon learn is that this number dictates the maximum number of years a human can live. If the number says 100, then anyone over the age of 100 will instantly fade away into non-existence, in a process the people refer to as the gommage. Once a year, the Paintress awakes from her restless slumber and paints a new number on the face of the monolith. Every year, the number ticks down, and the maximum human lifespan goes down along with it. Humanity is facing a slow extinction. It is possible to calculate down to the exact day when the entire species will cease to exist. And that day is not far away. It seems as if no one can do anything to stop it. The people of this world blame their extinction on the Paintress, that distant, mysterious figure born of calamity who, for reasons no one can comprehend, seems to wish for the death of all humanity. However, even in the very first hour of the game, some characters are already shown expressing doubt as to the Paintress's true nature and intentions. In the prologue, one character in particular, Sophie, who is facing her own imminent annihilation, only minutes away from her gommage, gazes out towards the distant outline of the Paintress' slumbering form and says,
"Sometimes I feel sorry for her."
Who? The Paintress?
Look at her. She looks sad. Maybe she's a prisoner too, stuck in the same cycle with us. Silly, huh?
Only you could choose empathy at a moment like this.
It's one of the few choices I can make.
I couldn't do it.
It's okay. You don't have to.
Well, the truth turns out to be complicated. The Paintress both is and is not the true source of their suffering. The Paintress, along with every other character in this game, are stuck in the cycle of grief. The primary theme of Clair Obscur's narrative is the corrosive nature of grief and the often self-destructive choices it leads people to make. Eventually, it will be revealed that the Paintress is an ordinary human woman, a mother who has lost her child, and grief has thematically fractured her life in the same way that it has physically fractured the world. The Paintress is a woman named Aline, and she is the matriarch of the Deconstruction family. This is a family of painters, and in this setting, a painter is almost a kind of magician or sorcerer, someone who has the power to create new, living, breathing worlds within a canvas. Worlds that can be physically entered and explored, worlds where new sentient life can be born. The painters are essentially creator gods who build, transform, and destroy entire worlds, extinguish or uplift entire races of intelligent life, annihilate or cultivate whole civilizations and cultures according to their own personal whims. The fractured setting of Clair Obscur, the world the members of Expedition 33 were born into, is one such canvas. This is not the real world, though I use that term loosely. What is real, and what it even means to be real, is another important theme of the story. Aline is not actually the creator of this canvas. Its original painter was her son, a man named Verso, and he painted it when he was still a child. Something that I was surprised by when I first played the game was the clashing tone of the setting. At first, this is presented as a pretty bleak and miserable world, filled with death and suffering and trauma. But when you start to explore, you will quickly run into a lot of kind of cartoonish humor. There is an intelligent race of creatures that live here called the Gestrels, and I use that term intelligent only in the broadest possible sense, because these idiots are stupid. They pretty much only exist to be silly. While I did appreciate the levity this cartoonish sense of humor added to what would have been an otherwise pretty unhappy story, I also found the swing in tone from sorrowful to goofy to be a bit jarring. But this is all explained by the fact that it was a world originally created by a child, and it includes all of the silliness and goofiness of a child's sense of humor. The whole world is essentially one big playground for a kid to have fun, but it is also a melancholy place, because not only have all of the children grown up and moved on, or in the case of Verso, actually passed away, but it is a playground in the process of being erased from existence, whose inhabitants are being thrown in the trash like old toys no one plays with anymore. And this ties into the motivations of the Paintress, of Aline. She is forsaking the trauma of the cruel and cold real world of adults for the playful, vibrant, silly world of a child. And by doing so, she unintentionally brought that grief and trauma with her. She infected this otherwise happy, childlike world with death and cruelty. She did not do it on purpose, but it is still her fault, at least partially. A great deal of fault also lies with her husband, Renoir, and her oldest daughter, Clea, as well. Really, it is the fault of the entire Descendre family, who are using these people's lives for their own selfish emotional needs. The family is made up of 5 members, all of whom are painters. Aline the mother, Renoir the father, and their 3 children in order from oldest to youngest, Clea, Verso, and Alicia. Prior to the start of the game, for reasons I'm not going to get into here, Verso was killed in a fire. It was a murder, and it was at least partially Alicia's fault. He sacrificed himself so that she would live. This death destroyed their family. They were all overcome by grief, but they responded to that grief in very different ways. Alicia responded to it by hiding, by shutting herself up in her room and closing herself off from the rest of the world. Clea chose to channel her grief into a relentless quest for revenge, into a war against those responsible for her brother's murder. Renoir attempted to control his family's mourning and dictate how and where they would grieve. And Aline chose escapism. She escaped inside her son's childhood canvas, because that canvas contained a piece of his soul, and the game means that in a very literal sense. You can actually find that piece of his soul inside the painting, physical and alive, because an artist's creations always contain pieces of themselves. When we create, whether that is painting, writing, music, or whatever, we pour ourselves into our creations, our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences, the things we care about, the things we consider to be important. We put all of that into what we create. By living inside the canvas, Aline was able to feel close to her dead son. This is a common response to grief and something that I think we can all understand, and in small doses, escapism really is not all that dangerous. We all need to escape from the real world sometimes. The problem comes when someone spends so much time escaping that they stop living their actual life, which is exactly what Aline does. She begins to live inside Verso's canvas permanently, forever, chooses to never return to her real life, her real family, or her real responsibilities. And it does not stop there. She began to paint something new into her son's old canvas. She painted new versions of her entire family, a new Renoir, a new Clea, a new Alicia, and most troubling of all, she resurrected a facsimile of her dead son, brought Verso back to life inside the painting with new memories, and she begins to treat him as if he is her actual son, which he arguably is since she is very literally his creator, but obviously he is not the real Verso, he is another Verso, but perhaps just as real as the original Verso, just a different person, but we're getting lost in a tangent here. The point is, she begins to behave as if her son never died in the first place. She refuses to accept reality, and that is not all she paints. As far as I can tell, Aline was the one who painted all or most of the city of Lumiere and its inhabitants, with false memories to believe that they have lived here for many generations. One of the Verso phantoms basically confirms this, telling the expeditioners that they do not belong in the painting, that this was a place created for joy and they have brought suffering and pain into the canvas instead. That is why the human characters feel aesthetically and tonally so different from the other inhabitants of the canvas, from the Gestrels and the Grandi and Esquiae, because these are beings painted by very different people at very different times for very different purposes. Sometimes exploring the world of Clair Obscur as a human character can feel like traversing an alien world, a place not meant for humans because it wasn't. Aline created Lumiere as a mirror of her own home, a place where she could live with her fake family in a familiar and comfortable setting, and she set it smack dab in the middle of Verso's childhood canvas. For a time, she and her new family and all the denizens of this new painted city lived in peace and comfort, but it was never meant to last. Very soon after their creation, these infant people's lives would be thrown into chaos and tragedy. As I mentioned before, Verso's father, Renoir, attempted to seize control of his family's grief, to dictate where and how they would be allowed to grieve, and eventually I will do a separate video about him as well. Anyway, he entered Verso's canvas and attempted to persuade his wife to leave her artificial painted family behind and return to her true family. And when she refused, he tried to force her to leave. But Aline fought back. As far as the inhabitants of the painting were concerned, this confrontation between husband and wife, between two master painters, was essentially a battle between the gods. The battle shattered their entire world, and that is the true cause of the fracture. They eventually fought each other to a stalemate. She trapped him underneath this monolith while he trapped her at its summit. Unable to force his wife out of the painting, Renoir decided to destroy the entire canvas instead, and so they are locked in a perpetual battle of wills, with him continuously attempting to erase the painting while she holds him back every single day, year after year, to keep her creations alive. Contrary to what the people of Lumiere believe, the Paintress is the source of life in this world, their creator and savior, the only thing standing between them and total annihilation. However, she is slowly losing her power, and with it, losing her ability to protect them. Because this is where their eldest daughter, Clea, enters the picture. I will also do a full video analyzing her character later, so I don't want to get lost in the weeds here. I will just say that she is the true source of the Nevrons, which she unleashed on the canvas specifically to destroy Aline's creations, meaning all of the humans. Okay, so painters use something called chroma to paint new living creations inside of a painting. And in a battle between painters, the one with the access to the most chroma will usually be victorious. Aline is stated to be the stronger, older, and more experienced painter between herself and her husband. She even claims that she was the one who taught him to paint in the first place. In order to handicap her mother and tip the scales of the battle in her father's favor, Clea uses her Nevrons to destroy her mother's human creations, transforming them into stone, and thus locking their chroma inside their corpses, where Aline cannot access it. And so, over time, as more humans are killed by Nevrons, she has less access to chroma, and so less power to hold back her husband. And this is why the painted version of Renoir, who really deserves his own separate video, slaughters the members of Expedition 33 on the beach as soon as they arrive on the continent. If he is the one who kills them and not the Nevrons, then their chroma can still return to Aline, instead of getting locked in stone, thus giving her the power she needs to keep the canvas alive. The number she paints on the monolith is a warning. As her power wanes, she is able to keep less and less of her creations alive, and particularly, the oldest ones are the hardest to sustain. The number represents the maximum age of the people that she can still preserve. However, even with all of this information in hand, I think Aline can still be viewed as something of a villain. While her husband and daughter are certainly far more at fault for this extinction than she herself, she still bears a great deal of responsibility for the suffering of these innocent people caught in the middle of her family squabble. Aline created the citizens of Lumiere for selfish reasons, so that she could have a place to escape from her grief. She does not really care about them. She cares about her own suffering and about using them as tools to alleviate her pain. She is the one who brought the pain and anguish of grief of the real world into their otherwise innocent canvas. The true victims are the inhabitants who are already here before her arrival, the Gestrels and the Grandi and Esquier, who did nothing to deserve any of this. That is the real tragedy behind the story of Clair Obscur. All of these random people who are given sentience and consciousness and free will just to serve the whims of a selfish family who do not really care what happens to their creations, do not care about the misery and the horror that their decisions inflict on others. Next, I want to examine the question of, what can we truly know about Aline's character? The thing is, the Aline we meet in the game is not her true self. The character we encounter here is one who has been completely consumed by grief. In this form, she's portrayed as obsessive, perhaps even slightly insane, portrayed as selfish, angry, stubborn, refusing to listen to reason, refusing to face reality, someone who has completely stopped caring about her real-world responsibilities, who does not even appear to care what happens to the rest of her family. But she was not always this way. Once upon a time, she was a very different kind of character. From Clea's dialogue, we know that Aline was once the head of the Council of Painters, and while we do not know anything about that council, it does reveal that she was once a leader of her community, a woman of importance, someone who wielded influence. According to Clea, her mother is the most powerful painter in the family, and I think that power is very clearly demonstrated in her creations. Sure, we are shown the axons that Renoir created, their sheer beauty and strength and size, and we do see the many Nevrons that Clea is responsible for. They're twisted in strange forms, deadly and creative. But Aline's masterpiece is far more impressive than either the axons or the Nevrons. Her masterpiece is the painted humans who inhabit the artificial city of Lumiere. She is capable of birthing new human life, and not just a shallow facsimile, but real people with sentience, free will, and creativity. Her creations are capable of all the same complexities and contradictions as an organic person, capable of both selfishness and selflessness, of both sacrifice and greed, of both despair and joy, who form complex relationships, societies, traditions, and cultures. And most shocking of all, are capable of creating their own art, their own music, and their own stories. I do not think Renoir or Clea are able to paint at this same level. Their creations, or at least the ones we see in-game, are far more inhuman and emotionally simplistic by comparison. Towards the end of the game, Renoir refers to the painted version of Verso as one of Aline's finest creations, and I do not believe that is mere flattery. Verso is a very emotionally and morally complicated character, and that demonstrates a true mastery over creation, the ability to create life that feels real. And finally, I think we can glimpse a reflection of Aline's true personality in Clea's character. During her limited time on screen, Clea is portrayed to be cold, harsh, and critical, utterly self-assured, someone who has total confidence in her abilities and her decision-making. At one point in her dialogue, she says that Aline would have agreed with her before Verso's death, before her personality was shattered by grief. I suspect that Aline and Clea were once very similar characters, that Clea is really just a miniature version of Aline as she once was. I suspect that Aline was probably not the soft, sensitive, and supportive variety of mother. I think she was more like a harsh teacher, someone who did not hand out praise very easily, someone who held her children to very, very high standards, and may have had little patience for those who did not meet those standards. If you examine a certain wall in the manor, a display of family paintings, Alicia mentions that the smallest canvas is her own, the only painting of hers that her mother deemed good enough for the wall. She was not the kind of mother who was willing to put any old garbage child arts and crafts project up on the refrigerator just because her kids were the ones who made it. She only doled out praise when she felt it was truly deserved. The manor itself, the home of the Deconstruction family, with all of its obvious signs of wealth, opulence, majesty, and decoration, also tells us a lot about her character. The difference between Aline as she once was, that dominating, impressive woman of influence and power, and the Paintress we meet in-game, who is little more than a pitiful, broken husk, speaks to the story's theme of the corrosive nature of grief, the way that grief can destroy a person's life. Finally, before I end this video, something I usually do in these analyses is follow a character's story from start to finish, to examine each appearance and discuss how that character is being developed from scene to scene, and I would like to do that with the Paintress as well. As I already discussed at the beginning of the story, the Paintress is portrayed as a distant and mysterious figure of unknown origin or motivation. At this point, she is less of a character and more of a narrative tool. Our heroes are setting off on a grand journey filled with wonder and danger, and the Paintress is both the catalyst and destination of that journey. She is the thing we are trying to reach, our ultimate goal. For most of the first and second acts, the Paintress does not participate directly in the story. She remains an object on the horizon, growing ever larger as the expedition makes its way forward. And let's take a closer look at her visual design here. Something I noticed right away is that the Paintress is not really portrayed in a powerful position. She is hunched over, with her head buried in her arms, apparently dormant, but it is not a peaceful sleep. She is twitching and shuddering as if her dreams were plagued by nightmares. And moreover, her body is gray and cracked, almost as if it is falling apart. Through this visual design, I think the developers were already trying to communicate to the audience that the Paintress is not as powerful as the expeditioners believe her to be. At one point in the story, Verso leads the expeditioners into the center of Old Lumiere, the ruins of the artificial city, to find what he describes as the heart of the Paintress. Well, at the center of the city stands the manor, a replica of the Deconstruction family's home, and inside we see the Paintress, though at this point in the story the player will not know that this is the Paintress. While she is trapped at the top of the monument, some part of her is still living here, with her painted family. Notice the intimate way that painted Alicia embraces her mother, or the way that painted Renoir defends her. This is the only time in the entire game when we catch a glimpse of the domestic life of this artificial family, of the ways in which they interacted with their creator and matriarch. And it is portrayed as loving and intimate. Anyway, moving forward, when Expedition 33 finally reaches the Monolith and begins their assault, they quickly realize that this colossal creature is both apparently invulnerable and also totally unresponsive. No matter what attack you choose, she does not wake up or suffer any damage at all. And that is because this Colossus is not her true form. It is just a puppet she uses to paint the numbers on the monolith. It serves no other purpose. Her true form, at least in the canvas, is this: a human woman of ordinary size. But notice the way her body seems to have corroded, as if it has been eaten away by acid. The way she seems to be actively fading away, and her face has completely collapsed in on itself, leaving a black, empty space where her eyes and nose and mouth once were. Her skin is mostly a stony, cracked gray with some streaks of gold, and her hair is pure white, streaming up and away from her scalp as if being blown in the wind. Once again, this visual design plays with the audience's expectations. Instead of a powerful villain, we find a woman whose body is cracked and broken and hollow and fading away, to the point that some parts of her body have nearly vanished. Some of her limbs are little more than shadows. The plot reason for this cracked appearance is that extended time spent inside a canvas is dangerous for humans. It causes very real physical damage. But the thematic reason is to show how Aline has been weakened by grief and the loss of her son. The first thing the Paintress does when she confronts the expeditioners is light Mael's face on fire, and then Lune and Ciel's faces too. And why does she do this? Well, her real son died saving his sister Alicia from the fire, in which her face was burned. When Aline created a new version of Alicia inside the painting, she kept her face burned and scarred out of a sense of resentment. She holds a lot of anger and bitterness towards her daughter for her role in her son's death. And when she is confronted by Maëlle, yet another version of her daughter, she lashes out by once again burning her face, seemingly almost without even thinking, a blind expression of anger. After this initial encounter, our heroes enter the monolith itself, a twisted mirror of Verso's canvas, and inside we are shown several of Aline's own memories. We see her teaching her children to paint, teaching her son to play piano. We see her relationship with her husband breaking down as he attempts to sit with her on this bench and she gets up and walks away. Though I have also wondered whether the male figure here is meant to be her son. It is hard to tell since we only see him from behind. As an adult, Verso chose to forsake painting and pursue music instead, which likely did cause a break in his relationship with his painting-obsessed mother, which also likely feeds into her sense of grief over his death, that their relationship may have ended on bad terms. Whatever the case, the identity of the figure in the next memory is much more obvious. This one shows Aline and her youngest daughter Alicia locked in a furious argument. And I am unsure if this memory takes place before or after the death of Verso. It may be evidence of the way her relationships with all of her family members broke down after his death, or it could be evidence that Aline and Alicia always had a rocky relationship. Either way, moving on, the final memory we encounter is from happier days. Aline and Renoir in love, holding each other close, showing the audience that there was a time when things were better, when this relationship was in a much healthier place. Next, let's discuss the scene that takes place at the top of the monument and how the Paintress is being characterized here. By the way, I rewrote and re-recorded this section of the video with a different microphone because I was not happy with the quality of the analysis, which is why the audio probably sounds different. Anyway, this is the only scene in the entire game where the Paintress actually speaks, so it should be very important to understanding her character. However, what the audience will discover here is that her mind is so deteriorated by this point in the story that there is actually very little of the true Aline left inside this misshapen, disintegrating husk that she has transformed into. The primary emotions she expresses in this scene are confusion and suspicion. She is deeply confused as to where she is, when she is, and who she is speaking to. More than once, she seems to mistake this Verso for the real Verso, you know, the dead one, which is especially troubling because this one is her creation. She should recognize him, and she also does not seem to understand why this version of Alicia does not have any scars from the fire. But of course, she was the one who repainted Alicia's face when she entered the painting, so she is really confused. She is also deeply suspicious. She suspects Renoir of playing tricks on her, that these are his creations and not hers. She cannot tell the difference between reality and fiction anymore, between her own creations or some elaborate ploy concocted by her husband. As I mentioned earlier in the video, extended time spent inside a canvas is dangerous for a painter. It is not just her physical body that is falling apart, but her mind too. This is the fate that Renoir and Verso are both trying to save her from. And it is the fate that awaits Alicia if she chooses to remain inside the canvas at the end of the story. The scene ends with her becoming overwhelmed by her sense of suspicion. She chooses to use violence to destroy these strange people who have suddenly appeared before her, for reasons she cannot fully comprehend, using her now deteriorated mental faculty. The great irony here is that, if she won this battle, she would destroy the very thing she has been fighting so hard to preserve. Verso, her son reborn, the balm to her grief. And this is a traumatic experience for this version of Verso, because this is his mother. This is the woman who created him. He genuinely does care about her. And here he is witnessing firsthand just how weak and sickly she has become. When you watch his reaction in this scene, how much he is affected by this sight, I think you can begin to understand why he was willing to go to such drastic lengths to save her from herself. Although Verso is a complex character himself, While he does genuinely care for both Aline and later Alicia, he is also just as motivated by his own selfish emotional desires as the rest of the members of the Deconstruction family. The battle ends with Aline collapsing to the ground, so weak she can no longer stand, and as Verso holds her, she asks him why. She cannot understand why her son, her own creation, would choose to oppose her, even though he must know it will mean the annihilation of his entire world. And this inability to understand his motivations is her greatest failure. She created this version of Verso, a truly conscious, sentient life form with free will and the capacity to change, to grow, and to learn. In some ways, she made him too well. She made him so alive and so real that he outgrew the limited purpose she had created him for. She made him to just be a band-aid to her own emotional wounds, but he became so much more than that. He has experienced his own lifetime of grief and heartache, of betrayal and loss, a lifetime which can never end because she made him immortal, or at least he can never die so long as she remains in the canvas. While Verso genuinely does care about the well-being of both his mother and Mael, I think he is just as motivated by his desire to die, to finally be done with all of this. And he is willing to destroy this entire world and every person in it to get what he wants. That is what I mean when I say he is just as selfish as the rest of the Deconstruction family. For most of the battle, the Paintress is portrayed as a godlike figure, with incredible power, with the ability to pull apart the veil of reality itself. However, in the third and final phase of the fight, things change. She falls to the ground, broken and helpless. She uses the last remnants of her power not to attack or even to defend herself, but to shield the expeditioners, her creations. In the original version of this video, I stated that I believed that Aline did not really care about the fate of her creations, that she was just using them to satisfy her own selfish emotional needs. And while I do still think that is at least partially true, I also now think that this final phase complicates her character's motivations. It reveals that she really did want to protect them, even if she had to sacrifice her own safety to do it. She does care about these people. Alright, I'm going to switch back over to the original script now, so again the audio will probably sound a bit different. In any case, Aline's story is not quite done yet. After the battle, and after Renoir, now with no one to oppose him, erases all of the remaining inhabitants of Lumiere, the audience will be shown a flashback in which we finally see her actual true form out in the real world. She is an old woman sitting frozen in front of a canvas, her eyes leaking paint, which is meant to represent the damage her extended stay in the canvas is doing to her real body. And meanwhile, the so-called real world and real family she abandoned is moving on without her. A war between magical painters and writers rages on, led by her oldest daughter Clea. Alicia enters the canvas in an attempt to help force her mother out, but then something very interesting happens. As she enters, her body is painted over by her mother. She is given a new unburnt face and a new identity, a new family, a whole new life inside the artificial Lumiere. I think this decision to paint over her daughter's identity potentially reveals something very important about Aline's character. It is never stated exactly why she does this, but I think there are three possibilities. The first is simply that she wants to put her daughter somewhere safe and out of the way of her conflict with her husband. And if so, then this attempt was a failure, because Alicia very much does end up getting involved in that conflict. The second possibility is that this is actually an attempt to recruit her daughter to her side. Maybe she believes that after experiencing life inside the canvas and seeing how real these people are, Alicia will desire to defend them, which is exactly what happens, in which case this was all a resounding success. The third possibility is the most interesting to me. Despite all of her anger and resentment, Aline still cares about her youngest daughter and wants to do her a kindness. She uses her powers to wash away the scars from the fire. She is giving her daughter something in the canvas that she could never give her in the real world: unconditional parental love, without all of the baggage and coldness and unattainable high standards of the Desandra family. However, this is perhaps more of a cruelty than a kindness, because in the canvas, in this fake world, Alicia discovers a sense of belonging and purpose that she never had in the real world, in which she is unwilling to give up. She becomes just like her mother, incapable of confronting reality and choosing to live a lie instead. Anyway, Aline shows up 2 more times before the credits roll. First, she re-enters the canvas during the final battle against Renoir to help defend her creation. And in the epilogue, if you take Verso's side and choose to destroy the canvas once and for all, Aline appears alongside her family at her son's funeral, apparently reconciled with her husband, and finally choosing to accept her son's death, which is about as happy an ending for her character as could have been hoped for. It's just too bad that all of those people had to die for it. Aline, or the Paintress as the inhabitants of the canvas name her, is an unusual kind of villain. Most of the villains I have examined on this channel are characters who seek total power, or who cannot let go of control under any circumstances. But Aline is a character who just wants to escape, to live in a fairy tale world of her own creation, a world where she can pretend that her son never died. She was not trying to hurt anyone, but in her desire to escape her own suffering, she gave birth to a whole race of intelligent, sentient beings, and unintentionally passed her suffering on to them. In the end, her creations far outgrew the limited purpose she had created them for. But even then, she could not allow them to make their own choices, not so long as those choices contradicted her own desires, which is demonstrated in the way that she refuses to allow Verso to die, even though he has long grown tired of this unhappy life. And that is what makes her a villain. Next time, I will be doing a deep dive into the other major villain of Clair Obscur, the man who is willing to annihilate an entire sentient race just to keep his family together. We are going to examine Renoir, so see you then.
Dim dim da 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 dim dim da 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 dim da di dum. Dim dim da 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 dim dim da 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 dim da di dum. Dans là-haut sera ravi, les toits à ce Renoir.